All right, let's dive in. You all wanted a deep dive on Marcus Aurelius's Meditations, so get ready to get philosophical.
Yeah, it should be fun.
We're working with that 1634 translation by Merritt Casaubon, that classic one.
Right.
Plus, we've got some good background info from the book's intro to help us understand, like, what was going on in Aurelius's world.
Yeah, that context is key. It's fascinating because Meditations wasn't meant to be, like, published. It was more like his personal journal.
Oh, really? So it's kind of like we're peeking into this secret diary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a window into the mind of a Roman emperor, dealing with some pretty heavy stuff.
Hmm.
Imagine you're trying to rule an empire,
Right, right.
face barbarian threats, deal with family drama, and on top of all that, still find time to think about the meaning of life.
It's pretty mind-boggling when you put it that way,
Yeah.
especially when you consider his rep as one of the five good emperors.
Yeah.
History remembers him as this wise and just ruler, but Meditations gives us a glimpse of, like, the man behind the emperor's mask.
Absolutely. And that's what makes it so compelling. We see him wrestling with these Stoic ideals, not just as abstract concepts, but as practical tools for dealing with, like, the immense pressures of leadership. It wasn't just theory for him.
Right.
It was a way to cope with the very real chaos of his world.
Yeah. Speaking of chaos, our sources mention he had all these threats from barbarian tribes,
Oh, constantly.
like the Marcomanni and the Quadi. It makes you wonder how he found any peace with all that going on around him.
That's where Stoicism comes in. At its core, Stoicism is about living in accordance with nature, recognizing that virtue is the only true good,
Okay.
while external things like wealth, health, even life itself are ultimately indifferent.
So it's about focusing on what you can control, your thoughts, your actions, reactions, and letting go of the rest.
Yeah, exactly.
Sounds kind of like some of those modern mindfulness practices.
Very similar. Imagine trying to stay calm while leading armies against invading forces, dealing with political intrigue, even coping with family tragedies. Sources mention he lost a lot of his children and his son Commodus. Well, let's just say he wasn't exactly following in his dad's footsteps.
Yikes. That's, yeah, talk about needing some serious inner peace.
Right.
It's like your teenage son is turning into a tyrant while barbarians are at your borders. That's a double whammy of stress.
Exactly. And that's where Stoicism provided a framework for navigating those challenges. It wasn't about ignoring emotions, but about choosing your responses wisely.
Okay, starting to get why Stoicism appealed to him then. So how did this philosophy actually play out in what he wrote? What are some of the key themes we see in Meditations?
Well, one that really jumps out is his constant reflection on death and the, transient nature of life. He reminds himself and us that our time on this earth is fleeting. Might seem kind of morbid, but it's actually a call to action.
Interesting. You'd think a powerful emperor would be focused on, I don't know, building legacies, conquering new lands,
Hmm?
not contemplating his own mortality.
Right. But for Aurelius, acknowledging death wasn't about despair. It was about living more fully in the present moment. He actually has this incredible quote, "Waste no more time arguing about what a good man should be. Be one."
Wow. That is powerful. Like, we don't have forever to get our act together.
Right.
It's like he's saying, stop procrastinating on being your best self and start living virtuously, like right now.
Exactly. And that ties into another key theme, virtue and living in accordance with nature. For Aurelius, this meant striving to be just, kind, courageous, self-controlled, even when facing adversity.
Oh, wow.
He even talked about showing kindness to those who wrong him.
That's a tall order, especially for someone in his position. I mean, can you imagine being a Roman emperor and choosing to be kind to someone who just, betrayed you?
Yeah,
That takes serious self-mastery.
absolutely. It speaks to his deep commitment to Stoic principles. Even when it would have been easier to lash out or seek revenge, he believed that true strength lay in mastering your own emotions and acting with virtue, regardless of what's happening around you.
This is fascinating. It's almost like he's saying our inner world is ultimately more important than our outer world. Is that a fair interpretation?
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. Aurelius truly believed our thoughts have immense power. He writes, "The happiness of your life depends upon the quality of your thoughts." He understood that by controlling our minds, by choosing our responses wisely, we can find a measure of peace, even amidst, the storms of life.
Okay, so we've got death, virtue, the power of the mind. Any other big themes that jump out at you from Meditations?
Yeah, one more that's really crucial to understanding Aurelius's worldview. He had this deep belief in the interconnectedness of all things. He saw the universe as this unified whole, governed by a divine reason, or logos.
Hmm.
This wasn't just an abstract concept for him. It informed his ethics and his actions as emperor.
So he wasn't just thinking about his own personal virtue, but how his actions affected the entire universe. That's a pretty expansive perspective.
It is. He believed that by living virtuously, by fulfilling his duties as emperor to the best of his ability, he was playing his part in maintaining the harmony of the cosmos.
Wow. It's like a cosmic perspective on Stoicism.
Exactly.
This is all so mind-blowing. It's really making me rethink my own priorities and how I approach challenges in my own life. But it also brings up a big question. If Aurelius was so wise and virtuous, why did he allow the persecution of Christians during his reign?
Yeah, that's the million-dollar question, and one that historians and philosophers still debate to this day. It really highlights the limitations of even the most enlightened philosophies when viewed through a modern lens.
So while we can admire Aurelius's personal virtues and learn from his wisdom, we also have to acknowledge the complexities of his historical context.
Exactly. And that's one of the things that makes meditation such a compelling read. It's not just a simple guidebook to perfect living, but a glimpse into the mind of a man wrestling with these profound questions, trying to live a good life amidst immense challenges. And sometimes those challenges revealed the limitations of his philosophy, even as he strived to live up to its ideals.
Now, speaking of fascinating individuals, we can't forget about Fronto,
Oh, right.
Aurelius's longtime friend and mentor. They exchanged all these letters back and forth, and they provide this really unique perspective on both their characters and the kind of intellectual climate of the time.
Their relationship was truly remarkable. You have Fronto, this flamboyant orator known for his wit and eloquence, and then you have Aurelius, the introspective emperor philosopher. Quite an unlikely pairing.
It sounds like the ultimate odd couple of ancient Rome.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
What can their letters tell us about Aurelius that we maybe don't get from Meditations?
Well, for one thing, we see a more human, relatable side of him. Fronto wasn't afraid to tease Aurelius, even gently criticizing his Stoic leanings. It's clear their friendship thrived on their differences. They challenged and supported each other, and their letters show this genuine warmth and affection.
That's so refreshing to hear. It, humanizes Aurelius, reminds us that even emperors need friends who can make them laugh and keep them grounded. Tell me more about this dynamic duo. What kind of things did they even write about?
Oh, everything. Literature, rhetoric, politics, philosophy.
Wow.
Sometimes their letters reveal the personal struggles they faced. Like, we see Fronto's profound grief over the loss of his grandson, and Aurelius trying to offer comfort and support.
So we get a glimpse of their emotional lives, their vulnerabilities, even amidst all these intellectual pursuits. Sounds like their friendship was a source of strength and solace for both of them.
Absolutely. And their letters offer us a valuable reminder that even the most serious philosophical folks among us need human connection, laughter, the support of loved ones. It's about finding that balance.
Right, right.
You could be a Stoic philosopher and still enjoy a good laugh with a friend.
That's a great point. It makes you wonder, what would their conversations be like today? What would Fronto think about our modern world? And how would Aurelius apply his Stoic principles to the challenges we face in the 21st century?
Good questions.
Let's take a quick pause here to gather our thoughts. Then we'll explore those questions in part 2 of our deep dive into the world of Marcus Aurelius.
So where were we? Oh, yeah. We were picturing what Marcus Aurelius and Fronto would think of our modern world.
Yeah. I can just imagine Fronto the orator with his own podcast.
Totally.
Maybe even a social media influencer, captivating audiences with his, quick wit and his sharp insights.
Oh, absolutely.
He'd have a field day with the 24-hour news cycle and all the drama online.
Oh, for sure. He'd be a master of the soundbite, you know? Crafting witty commentary on the latest trends and political scandals. And imagine the playful jabs he'd send Aurelius's way for being, a little too serious. Maybe even start a playful philosophical feud that goes viral.
Haha. Can you imagine the headlines? Stoic Emperor versus Social Media Savant. The ultimate philosophical showdown. Be pure entertainment gold.
It really makes you appreciate the timeless nature of their dynamic. Even across millennia, the interplay between their personalities just feels relatable. It speaks to that universal need for balance in our lives.
Yeah.
Having friends who can challenge us intellectually but also make us laugh.
Yeah, it's like that yin-yang energy, right? You need both the serious and the lighthearted to truly thrive. But speaking of serious, how do you think Aurelius would handle the constant barrage of information and stimulation we face today? He seemed to value solitude and contemplation, which, let's be honest, feels almost impossible these days.
That's a great point. I think he'd be both fascinated and completely overwhelmed by the pace of modern life.
Right.
Imagine him trying to meditate with constant notifications buzzing on his phone. It's enough to test the patience of even the most devoted Stoic.
I can just picture him now, desperately trying to find a quiet corner in the Roman Forum, only to be interrupted by a chariot salesman trying to get him to upgrade his ride.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But on a more serious note, I think Aurelius's emphasis on self-control and focusing on what's truly important would be incredibly valuable in our modern world. We're constantly bombarded with distractions, external pressures, the need to keep up appearances.
It's like we're all emperors in our own right, managing our own little empires of to-do lists, social media profiles, and personal ambitions.
Exactly. And Aurelius reminds us that true happiness doesn't come from external validation or material possessions. It comes from cultivating virtue and living in accordance with our own nature. His writings offer a potent antidote to the anxiety and FOMO that, kind of permeate modern life.
So in a way, his Stoicism could be even more relevant today than it was in ancient Rome. We might not be facing barbarian invasions, but we're certainly battling our own inner demons and societal pressures.
Precisely. And his writings offer us practical tools for navigating those challenges. He encourages us to focus on what we can control, to choose our responses wisely, and to find peace in the midst of, all the chaos.
It's like he's handing us a philosophical toolkit for building resilience and finding meaning in a world that often feels pretty overwhelming.
Exactly. And while we have to be mindful of the historical context, there's a timeless wisdom in his words that transcends time and culture.
Speaking of historical context, we were talking about Fronto's really emotional letters about losing his grandson. It's interesting how his approach to grief contrasts with Aurelius's more, I guess, stoic perspective.
Yeah, that's a key difference. Fronto's letters reveal this raw vulnerability, an outpouring of grief that feels so human and relatable. He doesn't shy away from the pain. He embraces it, gives voice to his sorrow.
Yeah, it's a powerful reminder that there's no one right way to grieve. We all process loss differently. But how did Aurelius respond to those expressions of grief? Did he offer stoic platitudes about accepting fate and moving on?
Actually, no. His response is surprisingly tender and compassionate. He acknowledges Fronto's pain and expresses his own sympathy. It shows a different side of Aurelius, a softer, more empathetic side than what we usually see in meditations.
That's really beautiful. It's like he recognizes that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone who's grieving is just be present, listen without judgment, and offer comfort.
Exactly, and it highlights an important aspect of Stoicism that often gets overlooked. It's not about suppressing emotions or becoming an emotionless robot. It's about choosing how we respond to our emotions and using reason to guide our actions.
So even though Aurelius advocated for controlling our emotions, he also understood the importance of empathy and compassion, especially when supporting a friend in need.
Absolutely. It's about finding that balance between Stoic resilience and human connection. You can be a philosopher and still be a good friend.
This is making me rethink my whole understanding of Stoicism. It's not about denying our emotions, but about managing them wisely and choosing to act with virtue, even when it's tough.
Precisely. It's a lifelong practice, a journey of self-discovery and growth, and it's one that we can all embark on, regardless of our background or beliefs.
So we've talked about Aurelius's Stoicism, his friendship with Fronto, and how his wisdom might apply to our modern world. But what about the Christians? We touched on this earlier, but it's a complex issue that we should probably explore a bit further. How can we reconcile Aurelius's reputation for justice and virtue with the persecution that happened under his rule?
Yeah, that's a question that has puzzled historians for centuries. And it's a reminder that even the most enlightened individuals can be products of their time, influenced by biases and ideologies that we might find unacceptable today.
It's like trying to judge a historical figure through a modern lens, you know?
Right.
It's important to understand the context of their actions, even as we grapple with the ethical implications.
Exactly. And in Aurelius's case, we see a man who strived to live virtuously, but whose worldview was limited by the prevailing beliefs of his era. It's a cautionary tale, reminding us to constantly examine our own assumptions and strive for a more inclusive and compassionate understanding of the world.
So while we can learn from Aurelius's wisdom, we also have to acknowledge the complexities and contradictions of his life and legacy. He was a man of great virtue, but also a man of his time, subject to the limitations of his own historical context.
Precisely. And it's up to us, as modern readers, to engage with his writings critically, to extract the timeless wisdom, while also recognizing those complexities of his life and legacy.
This deep dive has been an incredible journey so far. We've explored the depths of Aurelius's philosophy, his fascinating friendship with Fronto, and even attempted to imagine how he'd navigate our modern world. But there's still so much more to unpack.
There is.
Let's take another quick pause here, and when we return, we'll wrap up our exploration of Marcus Aurelius and Meditations, leaving you with some final thoughts to ponder on your own.
All right, we're back, ready to wrap up our deep dive into Marcus Aurelius and Meditations. It's wild how much we've covered, from, Stoic philosophy to picturing Aurelius as like a modern-day influencer.
Yeah. It really goes to show how powerful his ideas are. Even after all this time, 2,000 years, people are still reading his stuff, still debating it.
Right.
It's like his search for meaning, for virtue, in such a crazy world. It just keeps speaking to people.
Totally. It's not just ancient history, it's a conversation that's still going on. So as we wrap up here, I'm curious, what are your final thoughts on Aurelius? Was he a man ahead of his time or a product of his era? Maybe a little of both.
That's the question, isn't it? He was complex, for sure. I mean, on the one hand, his Stoic principles that focus on virtue, reason, self-control, that feels so relevant even now.
It's like he was, I don't know, an early therapist or something.
Right. Telling people to look inward, manage their thoughts, their emotions. But then we have that whole issue of the Christian persecutions, which kind of reminds us that even the smartest people can be stuck in the prejudices of their time.
It's that tricky thing about history. You can admire the good stuff, but you got to see the bad too.
Yeah.
Makes you realize we're all just figuring things out as we go,
Yeah.
even the great thinkers.
We're all on that journey. It's like they say, we stand on the shoulders of giants, right? We can learn from them, but got to be able to see further too.
Exactly. And I think Aurelius would like that, people looking at his work with a critical eye. He wasn't about creating followers who just agree with everything.
Right.
He wanted people to think, to question, to disagree even, find their own path to virtue, to wisdom.
And that's what makes meditations so cool, so lasting. It's not a rule book. It's like him thinking out loud, having a conversation with us across time, It makes you think about what you value, what you struggle with,
Yeah.
your own search for meaning.
And in that way, yeah, he was ahead of his time. That focus on interchange, finding peace when everything's crazy, living with purpose,
Yeah.
that goes beyond any one era.
I love that. It's not about being a perfect Stoic. It's about becoming the best you, however that looks.
Exactly. We all have that potential no matter what our life is like. And that message, that's something people needed to hear then, and they still need to hear it now.
So for our listeners who are just starting out with Marcus Aurelius, what's the one big thing they should take away? Like the core of his message they can use in their own lives?
I'd say focus on what you can control. Try to be good in your actions and do your thoughts. And remember, real happiness, it comes from inside you, not from what's happening around you. It sounds simple, but it can really change how you see things.
Yeah, a little Stoic wisdom for the modern world.
Right.
And I think if Aurelius were here, he'd tell us to go for it. Take on the challenges we have, use our brains and our hearts to make things better.
One good act at a time.
Well said. To all our deep divers out there, thanks for joining us on this exploration of Marcus Aurelius and Meditations. It's been a blast, and we hope you'll keep diving into that Stoic wisdom.
Keep questioning, keep searching, keep trying to live that life of purpose and virtue.
Until next time, keep on deep diving.